Hello. Today we are going to start Unit 3, and we're focusing today on Chapter 6, which is Managing for Quality and Competitiveness. And in Chapter 6, we're going to take a look at the nature of management. For any organization to be profitable, whether it's a for-profit or a non-profit, and to achieve its objectives, it has to have equipment, it has to have raw material to turn into products, has to have employees to make and sell those products, financial resources, and again, they have to be able to pay their employees in order for the business to operate. To accomplish this, you must also have managers to plan, organize, staff, direct, and control the work. So this chapter is going to focus on the introduction of the managers. We're going to talk about the areas of managers, what the functions of managers are, and how that they are important to organizations. First thing we want to look at is, what is management? Management is basically a process designed to achieve the organization's objectives by using its resources effectively and efficiently. And when we say effectively, that means that we have an intended result, and efficiently means we're accomplishing the objectives with minimum resources. Managers are those individuals in organizations who make the decisions about the use of all your resources. And again, like I said in the first slide, we're going to focus on managing, planning, organizing, staffing, directing, and controlling to reach those objectives for the management. You probably, when you first start out in a business role, are not going to be a manager, but you may eventually build up to being a manager. So this chapter is very important to you as you begin to look at your career and how you can advance your career and develop those characteristics that you need to be an effective manager. The importance of management. Every organization must acquire resources that we talked about, people, raw material, equipment. And then, because that's how you're going to get those goods that you're going to turn out to be able to sell to meet your goals and services. First thing is employees. As a manager, it's important that you recruit and you retain good employees, good people that work for you, and that's going to help you meet the objectives. You also have to acquire supplies for your area. We have to make sure that the customers get their products. In our global market today, there are several different diverse suppliers, so you've got to be able to work within those. And then also you've got to be able to make sure that you have the financial resources to pay for these essential activities. Remember, we talked about in one of the other very first chapter, I think it was, that the primary funding will come from owners, shareholders, or banking or other institutions. All of these resources that we've just talked about, they have to be coordinated and controlled if the company's to earn a profit. And the number one goal of every business, of course, is to earn a profit. And as a manager, that is going to be one of your duties, is to help your company earn a profit. Now, there are 5 main functions of management: planning, organizing, staffing, and directing and controlling. And the next slide has a video that goes into depth explaining these. So instead of going into this in depth, I'm going to let you watch this short video that I thought was very good and was very concise on, as a manager, what is your objective for each one of these areas. As the last slide in your video talked about, planning is one of the major goals, one of the things that you as a manager are going to have to do. And it's the process, again, of determining what the objectives are and deciding how to accomplish them. In order to do that, companies will have certain types of plans. And so we're going to look at these plans. The first one, there are 3 general types of plans for meeting objectives: strategic, tactical, and operational. The firm's highest manager, that's usually your CEOs, your CFOs, your presidents, they develop the strategic plan, which is a long-range objective and overall strategy or a course of action by which they're going to meet those objectives. They include plans to add products, purchase companies, sell unprofitable segments of the business, issue stock, move into the international market. Strategic plans must take into account that your organization's capabilities and resources. Because of the changing business environment and organizational plans, they have to be market driven. They have to match your customer's desire for value with your operational capabilities, processes, and human resources. Now, the next one is going to be a tactical plan. Tactical plans are short range, generally 1 year or less, and they're designed to implement the activities and objectives specified in that tactical statistical plan that we just talked about. These plans, again, they're usually over a year, and they help the organization to be on the courses that they established in your strategic plan. Because this tactical plan allows the company to react quickly to changes in the environment, then it's going to focus on the company's overall strategy. This is one that we have to periodically review and update. Declining performance or failure to meet the objectives can be one reason that you're going to want to go in there and review these tactical plans and see what you need to change or get rid of in order to begin to stay on the course objectives. The third type of plan is an operational plan, and that is a very short plan that specifies actions of individuals, work groups, or even departments that they need to accomplish in order to, again, start with the tactical plan, meeting those objectives for a year, and then moving up, and those objectives will move into your strategic plan. One thing is they do apply to details in executing how we're going to execute these activities quickly, whether it's a month, a week, or even a day. Now, this planning group is not listed as one of the main 3. This is called your crisis management or contingency planning, and it is an element in planning, but what it does is it deals with potential disasters. How are we going to handle product tampering, oil spills, fires, earthquake? And I thought this was very interesting that 51% of companies have outdated disaster recovery or business contingency plan. So this is something that when you move into a managerial position that you are going to want to look at. What is our contingency planning? And I look back at 9/11 and I think about when the Twin Towers came down. Think of all those businesses that lost everything. What was their contingency plan? Now remember, the Twin Towers housed a lot of financial planning, financial organizations, and if they did not have adequate contingency plans, they were out of business. They went, they lost everything. But because most of them had updated contingency plans, they had all their records kept off site. They knew what to do in case of something like this happening to them. this is just talks about Herbalife doing business in countries, and that their contingency plan must be considerate of the fluctuating exchange rate that we talked about in another chapter. Now, the second component of being an effective manager is organizing. And what organizing is the structuring of your resources, and all those we've talked about, and the activities. So getting them together to accomplish the objectives in an efficient and effective manner, which is very important, that we want to do it quickly, but we also want it to be effective. Organizing is important for several reasons. It helps create synergy, which affects the whole system, and where it's equal to more than just one part, where everybody works together, or every department is working together to accomplish those objectives. It also establishes line of authority. It improves communication. It helps avoid duplication of resources, which would just double your output, the amount of money you're putting out. So you can help that. And then it also improves competitiveness by speeding up decision making. We talked about in one of the other chapters about the levels of management, and when, like a sole proprietor, they can accomplish things quicker because there's no levels of managers. But in an organization, you do have those. So if you are an effective manager, you can help speed up that decision-making process. The third step in being an effective manager is staffing. That is your part of hiring people to carry out the work of an organization. Now, some organizations have HR departments that do all the hiring, but most of the time you would, as a manager, have a little bit of say-so in who you're bringing in into, of course, your people that work directly under you. And so you may have some managerial duties, such as recruiting, telling HR what skills they need for these jobs. One of the most important things that we want to think about is motivating and training your employees. If your employees are not motivated, they're not going to meet up to their potential, therefore bringing down your productivity. And then, of course, you've got to determine pay and benefits. Again, that may fall under HR in your area, but if it's a small business, you may be responsible for determining how much you're going to pay your employees. And more important, I think this is one of the most important things, is as a manager, you want to prepare your employees for moving up within the organization. I always tell my on-campus class that as a manager, you need to always be preparing someone to take over your job. If you say, well, I'm not going to let anybody know what I'm doing and be prepared for taking over my job, you're going to die one day, and somebody's got to take that job. And what better thing to do to leave a company and say, here's the person that can take my place. They know exactly how to do my job. They know what's required. That is being a great mentor. So you want to think about that. Now, when we're talking about staffing, a lot of times we use Monster for staffing. We use LinkedIn. Those are some of the things. Most of the time we don't just let people walk in off the street, because being in staffing, we want to do some background checks and different things in that area. Another thing that as a manager you might be required to do is downsize. And what that is the elimination of employees from a organization. And this just kind of tells you some of the things that you would have to do. I do know that my brother-in-law is in managerial position with Mohawk Carpet, and this is one of his jobs. And he said back during the early 2000s, they had to lay off quite a few people and close down plants. And he said it was very, very stressful as a boss to go in and tell people that they no longer had a job because they were outsourcing their work to other countries. to be effective in this area, you need to be promoting optimism and positive thinking, and making sure that the morale for the remaining employees is consistent and high. Number 4 is directing. And directing involves motivating and leading your people to achieve, again, those organizational objectives that we have just been really bombarded with. Good directing involves telling employees what to do, when to do it, through the implementation of deadlines, and then encouraging them to do their work. So you want to make sure that they know what they're going to do, and they also are doing it in a timely manner. Managers can motivate employees by making sure you have incentive. You could do incentives of a raise, incentives of giving them a bonus for doing a good job. But, you know, in today's workforce, most employees, they want more than just money. They need to know that your employer values their ideas and their input. And so to be a smart manager, you need to ask workers to contribute ideas of how can we reduce cost, how can we make equipment more efficient, how can we improve customer service, or even develop new products. By allowing them a little bit of input, this gives them value. And then the last area of management is controlling. And controlling is the process of evaluating and correcting any of those other activities we've talked about to keep the organization on course. And it can involve measuring performance. How do we measure performance? You want to compare today's performance with past performance and standards and objectives. You need to identify deviations from their standards and what caused them. Investigate those causes of deviations. And then, how am I going to correct this so that we can get back on course to meet our company's objectives? Controlling and planning are closely linked. Planning establishes those goals and standards, and then by monitoring the performance and controlling it, comparing it with the standards, you as a manager can determine whether your performance is on target. And if it's not on target, then you've got to determine why, and then you've got to figure out what kind of actions you need to take to get your area back on target. This slide just kind of gives you, we're talking about levels of management, and it kind of gives you an idea of the different types of managers. First of all, we have your top managers, which are your presidents, CEOs. Middle management is plant managers, division managers, departments, and then you have first line. And if you'll notice, there are more first line managers than there are top line. And as I told you in a previous one, the trend now is to get rid of some of the top managers and focus more on the middle and the first line. As a first-time employee, you are probably either going to be first line or middle manager. I also have a video, the next video, that gives you a great overview of what each one of these areas work to and what their functions are.
In today's fast-paced, competitive world, businesses are continually changing. Most of these organizations are on the hunt for the competitive advantage, or a way to strategically move ahead of the competition in the marketplace. However, earning the competitive advantage takes work. Goals must be set, plans must be made, people must be motivated and mobilized, resources have to be gathered and distributed, and objectives have to be monitored and assessed. Enter managers. These men and women come in many forms, but all share the common task of working with people and resources to achieve organizational goals. An organizational goal can be something as simple as finding a way to shorten the amount of time it takes for a product to leave the warehouse, or as elaborate as introducing a new product to the marketplace that makes all previous versions of this type of product obsolete. Regardless of the goal, someone needs to manage all of the factors necessary to seeing that goal become a reality. Think of a manager as the foundation, support beams, and roof of a house. It provides the necessary support from bottom up, as well as provides oversight to all the parts in between. While this might seem like a great deal of responsibility and accountability for just one person to have, much like an onion, there are several layers of management. The roles and responsibilities a particular manager has correlates to their position in the organization. While job titles and roles can vary from organization to organization, they typically fall into one of three levels of management. The first level of management is called top-level management. Top management is made up of senior-level executives of an organization or those positions that hold the most responsibility. Job titles such as Chief Operating Officer or COO, Chief Executive Officer, CEO, Chief Financial Officer, CFO, President or Vice President are commonly used by top managers in organizations. These top managers are responsible for setting the overall direction of a company and making sure that major organizational objectives are achieved. Their leadership role can extend over the entire organization or for specific divisions such as finance, marketing, human resources, or operations. The second layer of management is called middle-level management. This level of managers report to top management and serve as the head of major departments and their specialized units. Middle managers serve as a liaison between top managers and the rest of the organization from a very unique standpoint.
This slide, I think, is very interesting to notice that it's the time spent on your function management based on what type of a manager. If you notice, under our top manager, they spend most of their time on planning. They're the strategic managers. Then you go to the middle managers, most of their time is organizing, making sure that I know my company's objectives and how am I going to achieve those. Then if you go to first line managers, their main function is controlling. So they are making sure that my department is meeting those organizational goals that the top managers have developed in their planning and organization, the strategic plan. These next slides, again, just going in a little more depth of what each group and what they would do. Top managers is our first slide. And then we also have the 5 rules of successful diversity that goes under top management so that they can make sure their company is known for hiring and promoting and making sure that their company is a diverse organization. This one is talking about middle managers, what their goals are, what their main job description is. And then you have first line managers, and I did want to point this out, that under first line managers, they are the ones that are going to be more than likely dealing with the production type workers, the ones that are very unskilled, and they have to have someone that is helps them and works with them and gives them specific directions. These are some other types of management areas that are not listed, that we didn't go into great detail, but these are some areas that you might consider going into. You have financial managers. Those are you people that love working with money and accounting and different things like that. They are the ones that get the money, they manage the money, and they know where the money's going. Then you have a production and operation manager, and they develop and administer the activities in transforming goods into services and ideas ready for the marketplace. We will have chapter 7 is just based on this one altogether. You also have the human resource manager, and that's the one that handles the staffing functions, and they deal with employees in a formalized manner where, you know, they look at the employees, they make sure everything is correct and everybody's being treated equally. There is diversification within the organization. You also have a marketing manager, and this person is responsible for planning, pricing, and promoting the products and how to get them out to the customers. You have the IT technology manager, who's responsible for implementing, maintaining, and controlling technology. And then you have the administrative manager, who manages the entire business or the segment of the business, and they don't really they're not formal in one of these areas, but they may be over the whole area that encompasses these other areas of management. Another thing, and this will tend to fall under your information technology area, but it's talking about managing automation and robots in the workplace. As digital technology and automation come to the forefront in business operations, many thought that the managerial operations would no longer be necessary. However, the opposite has proven to be the truth. Managers are still necessary, but your activities have begun to change. You have to have technical and leadership skills in today's order. You've got to know everything about how to run the computer, how to use robots in the workplace, and different things like these. These duties are now being turned over to employees who can oversee the operations of machines on the production line. In our on-campus class, I have a gentleman that comes from Pilex and talks about the actual operations of the machines. And yes, they have several of these robots and machines, but they have to have qualified managers and employees to make sure these machines are operating correctly and know what to do when the machines go down. Some other managerial roles that you need to be looking at is you have to be decisional. A lot of times you need to be an entrepreneur, thinking outside the box. I like this next one. You have to be a disturbance handler. You're going to have times when things just don't go right, and what do you do? How do you handle that? Resource allocator. Where are you going to get your resources? You have to be a negotiator. You're working with people, and all people don't get along. So you've got to be able to know how to manage this when there is conflict on the job. Informational. You have to monitor the information. You have to be a disseminator, knowing what information you want to put out to the public, to your employees. You have to be a spokesperson for your department. You have to have interpersonal skills. You've got to be a figurehead. People, they have to be able to look up at you. They have to trust you. They have to believe in you. You have to be a leader. Not only are you a manager, and there is a difference between a manager and a leader. A manager tells people what to do. A leader pulls the wagon and tells them how to do it as he's pulling it. And then you're a liaison between upper management and your employees. You're in the middle. You're there looking out for their best interest. You also have to have technical experience. You have to be an expert in the training to perform jobs that are related to particular areas of management. You can't teach your employees if you don't know how to do it yourself. So sometimes you may have to take additional training when new equipment, new ways of doing things comes to your area. You have to be trained. You have to know that job backward and forward to train yours. This area is needed most by the first line managers, but it's least critical to the top level managers. Very seldom do you see a CEO of a company come all the way down to the first line, even in a production factory, and start working on those machines and turning out production. They don't do that unless they happen to be on that show, that reality TV show, Undercover Boss. Another area that you need to be honing in on and getting your skills up is conceptuals. And that is the ability to think abstract terms and to see how parts fit together to form the whole. This is needed most by top level managers because they're going to evaluate where the company's going to be in 5 years under that strategic plan. So they have to be able to a little bit think outside the box. A financial manager is one that's responsible for attaining those funds. They have to know how to go out and solicit additional funds to build new factories. They're going to look at both short-term and long-term. You need analytical skills. And analytical skills is the ability to identify relevant issues, to recognize its importance, understand how they go, that the relationship between them, and what's the cause of the situation. Again, this goes much more into the area of a top-level manager because they can resolve ethical issues using analytical skills. Another area is human relations skills, and this one is very, very important because it is using that skill to deal with people, not only inside but outside the organization. The gentleman that I told you about, I had come from Pilex. He had never spoken to a group of people outside his. He was a manager. He was a first line manager, but he had never spoken to a group outside of his employees. Of course, he was very nervous, but he said that it was very beneficial to him to help him learn how to deal with people outside of his organization, and that would help him develop his human relations skills and move up to become that middleman employee and different things like that. Some of the things is you have to be able to have good communication skills. You need to know how to deal with people with being a manager. They're important in all organizations, but especially service-based organization, hospital, airlines, and banks. And I know a lot of times we go to these three areas and we get upset at the hospital because we're having to wait. An airline, they may have to cancel our flight, and then we get all upset with them. And then maybe a bank, when you're trying to get a loan and you don't qualify, that's where they have to have that human relations skill, because if I leave and I'm not happy, I'm not only going to tell them I'm not happy, I'm going to tell everybody I come in contact with, and that hurts my business. This is just 7 tips for successful leadership. I think they're very good and something you can look at as you begin to work and you begin to think about, how am I going to develop my leadership style? This slide just talks about leadership styles. There are different terminologies for different leadership styles, but the three that our book talks about in depth is the autocratic, the democratic, and the free rein or laissez-faire type leader. The next slide is a video that goes into depth telling you how you deal with these, how these develop these different types of styles.
What do you think the people around you would say about your leadership style? Because that's really what ends up mattering in the end, how people follow you. So we're going to look at each of these styles, and we'll look a little bit at the laissez-faire style of leadership in this video. Let's unpack it. Hello again, friends. Alex Lyon here, and this channel Communication Coach is here to help rising leaders like you increase your personal impact so you can lead the people around you to higher and higher levels of excellence. And a big part of that is your leadership style, how you come across, how people perceive you. We're going to look at two of the main leadership styles today. The first one is the autocratic leadership style. This is a little bit old school. It's the typical boss-centered approach to leadership, where the boss has a centralized approach to making decisions. He or she tells people what to do and expects them to follow. Typically, there's a high power distance between the boss and the other people. In other words, there's not a lot of intermingling and talking and socializing. There's a clear separation in rank. Now, this leadership style can work, and it is an appropriate, legitimate style of leadership. However, there are some strengths and some weaknesses. I would say the biggest strength is that when you're there and things need to be done and you're in control, things will generally get done. When you're telling people what to do and you're watching them, they will often follow through. On the downside, as soon as you leave the room, if you're normally being very autocratic and authoritarian, you leave the room, people will tend to stop working as hard because you're not there to watch them really closely. In my experience, new leaders tend to default to this autocratic style of leadership. So they get nervous, they have a new level of responsibility, and in that moment of anxiety, they snap into a more autocratic approach. So this is not necessarily one that I personally use, so let's talk about the second one, and that's the democratic style of leadership. This is the one that I prefer. This democratic style has a two heads are better than one philosophy. In other words, you're thinking more about the group, it's not boss-centered. A democratic leader will tend to talk to his or her people quite a bit, gather feedback about possible decisions and see where people stand on an issue. It does not mean, however, that the democratic leader completely hands over power and responsibility. The democratic leader still may make all the decisions, but he or she does so with input from everybody. And then when the projects are delegated and the decisions are handed out, people can see themselves in those decisions. They feel a little bit of ownership. And the other benefit here is that when the democratic leader leaves the room, people will generally continue to work really hard. They might not even notice that the democratic leader isn't there because they already feel like they're part of those decisions and they have ownership over those projects. The third style of leadership, which is not really one we're going to focus on, is the laissez-faire style of leadership. And a lot of times people think this means the lazy leader, but it doesn't. It just means hands off. That's French for hands off. And sometimes this leadership approach is actually perfectly fine. For example, if you have really highly motivated, highly educated experts and you've hired all the right people, you shouldn't have to watch them very carefully. For example, if you're running a hospital and you've hired all the right surgeons, I hope that you don't have to go in there to your surgeons and say, okay, do a great surgery today. You could do it. Come on, get fired up. Hopefully your surgeons are already up to speed and excited about doing a good job, and you don't have to. So you can take a hands-off approach with some people in terms of your leadership approach. So those are the two main styles: autocratic, democratic, and then we talked a little bit about laissez-faire. Question of the day: what's your style of leadership? And better yet, what do you think the people around you think about your style of leadership? I would love to hear your comments in that section below. So thanks, God bless, and I will see you in the next video.
Every so often you're going to see leaderships, what they call leadership styles, change terminology. And this is a new one that is being thrown out there, and it is called an authentic leader. And an authentic leader is a little different from the other three leadership styles because it's not what we call exclusive. both your democratic and your free reign leaders could be qualified as an authentic leader, depending on how they conduct themselves among the stakeholders. Authentic leaders are passionate about the goals and missions of the company. They display the corporate values in the workplace, and then they also form long-lasting relationships with stakeholders. Now, remember, stakeholders are not just shareholders. It's anyone that has a stake in the business. So that could be an employee. They're forming a good relationship with their workers, their employees. And this just gives an example of an authentic leader. This is another term that is relatively new on the managerial feedback, different things that we think about, and it's called employee empowerment. And that's when employees are provided with the ability to take on responsibilities and make decisions about their jobs. You have a participative corporate culture is beneficial because employees feel they're taking an active role in the firm's success. One example of this was back in the late 90s. There was a Japanese corporation that actually opened up a plant in Tennessee, and they actually were employee empowerment. They didn't call it that, but they let the employees take an active role in the firm's success. And that was Saturn. And that was one of the first manufacturing plants that actually let the employees have a say-so in what went on within their plant. And so it's not really new. It's just they kind of changed the terminology. In that, leaders must adopt systems that's going to support the employee's ability to provide input. And then as a manager, you have to be trained to empower your employees to make decisions in challenging situations. This slide just talks about leaderships and teams. Of course, teams is the buzzword in all environments now. And what you want to think about is that teamwork is an effective way to encourage employee empowerment. Although decision-making in teams is usually collective, their most effective teams are when all employees are encouraged to contribute your ideas and recommendations. As a manager, you have got to make sure that you are in charge of the team, and that you don't let outspoken employees dominate the team and engage in groupthink, so that where the members go with the majority rather than going with what they think is right. So it would be that you wouldn't be needing to not only be trained, you would want to train some of your employees how to listen to one another and make sure they provide relevant feedback, because you don't want to have one person dominate a team. One way that you can eliminate that is to rotate team members so that one person is not always in charge. You're going to have people on a team that are extroverts who are going to talk, and they're going to do all the decision making. You're going to have some that are introverts, and you as a team member, what you have to do is pull out that introvert and give them leadership positions so that it would help them become more outspoken. Finally, we're going to be talking about decision making. And there are 5 steps or 5 or 6 steps, depending on which model that you're going to use, in the decision-making process. First of all, you have to define the problem. What is my decision I have to make? Then you have to develop what are your options. You have to analyze each of those options. You have to select the best option. You have to implement that decision. And then finally, you have to monitor the consequence of the decision you made. So first step, of course, is decision making, is recognizing and defining it. And this just gives you some ideas. It can be positive or negative. It can be on small scale or large scale. But you have to, management has to define what the decision is you're going to make. Then again, the second step is analyzing your options. Look at each option. What are the positives? What are the negatives? The third step is to analyze them. Consider whether each option has addressed the situation. Does it meet what the criteria we need to analyze the problem we are looking at? Then the fourth step is to select that option. Looking at them, if it's a team, then what does the team decide? And then the fifth step in the decision-making process is to implement it. It can be simple or it can be complex depending on what that decision is. One thing you always want to do is to prepare for unexpected consequences. Not every decision is going to go exactly like you have decided it should. And so then if that happens, you've got to know what to do. And then the final decision is to monitor the consequence. Did it implement the decision, the result? If yes, it was a great decision. If no, then I need to go back and see why it did not accomplish what we wanted to. Thinking about management and practice. Management is not a cut and dried process. Every day is not going to be cookie cutter cut out. There's no mathematical formula for managing your company, your people, your department, or making sure that the goals are met. And it says, John P. Cotter said that functions can be boiled down to two basic activities. Figuring out what to do despite uncertainty, great diversity, and an enormous amount of potential relevant information. That's thinking outside the box and doing your research. And then finally, getting things done through a large and diverse set of people, despite having little or direct control over most of them. And especially if it's upper management, they're not going to have control over them. If it's you as a frontline manager, you still have to get things done, but you would have more direct control over your people. Here's just some things that you want to think about, making sure that you are looking at. You want to have an agenda. Every day you should have short-term goals, your long-term objectives. By having a calendar, it's going to help you make sure you know what needs to be done, and you have to think about that it doesn't all have to be written down. You can use your Outlook. There's calendars in there. There's different types of technology that you can do to help you manage that agenda. And then you have to network. Networking is one of the most important things you do in every type of business environment, because it helps you build relationships with your colleagues, and it can help managers achieve those items that are on your agendas. Just some of the challenges of today's business world that you will maybe faced with in a business environment. And finally, LinkedIn is a way that you can actually go in and share ideas and connect with people that are in your particular area. Things that, even though you may not know these people, they can give you some good resources to help you figure out what's going wrong in your department. And then these are the discussion questions. Our next chapter is going to be on teamwork.